My name is Stu Webb, and I want to discuss with you today government corruption during the 70s, the 80s, and 90s, and the various scandals that have been involving major players within the United States government, as well as here in Denver, Colorado. The subject matter that we're going to be discussing will be savings and loan, HUD, junk bonds, Iran-Contra, the movement of guns and drugs in and out of this country, and the laundering of money through Denver, Colorado, and Silverado Savings and National Acceptance Company. We're also going to be talking or discussing about government officials and why during the 80s that nothing was done regarding these major scandals. I have filed recently this year in 1993 in the United States Federal Court here in Denver, Colorado, requesting petition to see a grand jury regarding these crimes and the evidence that I have, and the other members within my network. There's 150 of us that are wanting to appear either before a congressional committee or before a federal grand jury. I'm going to first read from the grand jury letter that I submitted on January the 20th, 1993. I request the opportunity to testify before a United States federal grand jury regarding a number of white-collar crimes which I have knowledge of and which involve a number of local, state, and federal officials, as well as a number of Colorado businessmen. The subject matter of my testimony involves crimes of money laundering, illegal drug dealing, bribery, illegal political contributions, savings and loan and bank fraud, including but not limited to Silverado Savings Loan, theft of HUD, Housing Urban Development Funds and Property, Small Business Administration loan fraud, fraud and bribery involving the new Denver airport, junk bonds and the theft from investors of their life savings, fraud involving U.S. government minority contracts and sale of weapons to foreign countries in violation of the U.S. Neutrality Act law, which is treason. Along with 150 others, witnesses are willing to testify regarding the aforementioned manner if given the opportunity. Now, that was filed on January 20th, 1993. On June the 14th of 1993, after no response was made, I filed this petition in the United States Federal Court, which is Stuart Webb versus the United States of America, which was case number 93Z1273. And this document was asking the United States government to do their statutory duties to allow us to appear before a grand jury. And this says, filed on June the 14th, please take notice of the above captioned plaintiff hereby petitions this court pursuant to Title 28 U.S.C. 1361. The plaintiff seeks an order compelling the district court and the United States attorney to statutory duties under Title 1833-32A and Title 18 U.S.C. 4 and Title 18 U.S.C. 1968 ordering civil investigation demand. The plaintiff seeks to bring a complaint of criminal activity before a grand jury. Find a complete and true copy of complaint request for grand jury presentation dated January the 20th, 1993. Now, this was dismissed by Zeta Weinschenk, federal judge in Denver, Colorado, as a result of bribes that obviously she's been taking for a number of years. There's a videotape here that was done by an intelligence officer here in Denver, Colorado, which I have seen, and which this man wants to present before a federal grand jury, showing that Zeta Weinschenk had taken bribes and payoffs. She claims to have no interest in the petition that she dismissed, stating that she has no interest in Birnbaum and Weinschenk. Joseph Birnbaum happens to be an attorney of record of one of the players in this fraud. Now, the main players that are involved are George Bush, Henry Kissinger, Leonard Millman, Larry Mizell, Philip Wynn, Pat Bowen, John Antonucci, Marvin Davis. There were many other players that were in the government level, but these individuals in Denver, Colorado. Now, basically what they've done, I'll start with the savings and loan fraud. As an example, I'm going to quote from an article because I think this summarizes what we're going to be talking about. This article basically reads, MDC makes comeback. Chairman Larry Mizell's MDC has made a huge bounce back from the brink. The once beleaguered shareholding singled by virtually every scandal of the 1980s. It raised millions through defunct Drexel, Berman, Lambert did megabucks with Silverado Lincoln Savings and had convicted HUD figure Phil Wynn on his board and figured heavily in Colorado's campaign money laundering scam. No matter, thanks to recovering home building and spreading nationwide, the company has come back. This appeared in February of 1993 here in Denver, Colorado, in the Denver Post. This, I believe, has summarized it. Now, on the S&L, I've investigated these men, and what the charges that I'm making today. I have done work with Time Magazine, with Spotlight newspaper, with Now Can Be Told, and many other articles. As an example, this article was about running with a bad crowd in SNL honchos that appeared in October of 1990 regarding these men. And in this article, Jonathan Beatty, who is rated as the #1 reporter in the nation now as a result of his breaking the BCCI scandal, he had numerous pages regarding Silverado Savings, MDC Holdings, Neil Bush, Poster Boy, and so forth, and the ties and connections. This did a tremendous effect on the prosecution, or the direction that the prosecutors were going at that particular time. But since then, there has been major cover-up here in Denver, Colorado, by the United States attorneys and federal judges, and I'm going to be getting into that, how these men were bribed and paid off, and where they laundered their money, which was through M&L Business Machines Company, and I will be showing you that later on in this program. Now, the S&Ls that they've hit, that I've been able to identify and do through a trail of not only myself and my own personal investigation, but the investigations of 149 other people. This includes not only federal whistleblowers such as myself, but this includes former FBI agents, former DEA agents, former pilots, everything, people who were involved in the Charles Keating case, so forth. These are the people that are in our network, and the documentation that you can see here, the boxes that I have, is just represents a very small portion of the total amount of documentation that we do have from depositions and government reports and so forth. We have, as an example, in the Charles Keating case alone, I worked with the private investigators there. They had 42 million pieces of documentation on the connections between MDC, Southmark Corp. Out of Dallas, Texas, which owned Sentinel Savings, and American Continental, which owned Lincoln Savings. Now, the S&Ls are probably too numerous to go through because of the subjects that I desire to cover, but I'll hit a few of the majors that they were involved with, including, which is Imperial Savings, Far West Capital, Silverado, Columbia Savings, Sentinel Savings, Sunrise Savings, Pima Savings, Centrust Savings, Hill Financial, Empire Savings, Sun Savings Loans, Silver State, Lincoln Savings, and so forth. There's over 130 S&Ls that I have identified which involve these men. The total amounts on these, so forth, that these men have hit. Now, I'm going to explain, as an example, the situation with these savings and loans. First, I'd like to identify of record a document which most people don't know exists, which prohibited Charles Keating from ever entering into the savings and loan business, and this was by the Securities and Exchange Commission, dated in 1979, later filed by a source of mine in Arizona in 1986, I believe the date is, regarding the activity of Charles Keating at that time. Now, the Securities and Exchange document prohibited Charles Keating from ever entering. He was put in business by Carl Lender from American Financial Corp. And Carl Lender is a major player, and in these S&L fraud that was also perpetuated by the MDC crowd here in Denver, Colorado. Another document I have is from the workup from the private investigators on the Charles Keating case that got a $2 billion judgment against Keating in July of 1992 out of Tucson, Arizona, which was the RICO, the Racketeering, Influence, and Corruption Organizational Lawsuit, which brought Charles Keating to jail. It was not the federal government that put Charles Keating in jail, and it was not the state government. It was because of this RICO suit, and later the state filed charges, put him in jail, and after it was all said and done and they got judgment, then the United States government settled a $750 million fine. But the total transactions, this was land and loan swaps that went on between American Continental Corp., which was Charles Keating's main corporation, Lincoln Savings, a subsidiary of American Continental, MDC Holdings, and its subsidiary, Silverado Savings. And without naming each and every transaction that's here, there's over $423,822.69 worth of loan transactions that occurred between these four companies alone. And this was for a purpose. These transactions were to perpetuate junk bond sales by Michael Milliken, for they could falsify their financial document I have here, which there has been numerous people. Exchange comes out then and grabs the documents with court orders to take them away from them. This Securities and Exchange was filed against MDC on September the 1st, 1989, and it was commission file number 18951. And what it says is MDC is prohibited from making sales of any junk bonds without SEC approval, doing any transactions, so forth, over $300,000 because of their illegal activity in perpetuating their junk bond game. The other situation pertaining to junk bonds is this is a copy of a lawsuit filed in the Southern District of California. It was involving $250 million worth of junk bonds, where MDC Holdings had sold these bonds to investors, claiming that they were going to get 2% above prime and so forth on their money. These men and women that had put their life savings into these bonds had lost most of their savings. In this particular lawsuit, this was $250 million. They settled out of court for $20 million, which means that MDC made $230 million from these unsuspecting investors. Now, it also, I might add to the document, it has the MDC crowd as well as it has Michael Milliken on the page too. And the particular case number on here was civil number 900-856, filed on June the 5th, 1990. That's one scandal. I can go into numerous pages of other documentation to show that Silverado Savings had drug and gun money laundered through it, that the transactions on the bank's example in Denver, Colorado, there is they take Omni Bank, which is a subsidiary company of MDC Holdings, and they move loans transactions from other banks into MDC. For FDIC will pick up the tab. Otherwise, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation would not pay on these loans. And as an example, they used front men. We found in 3 men, there was over $7 billion these 3 men had borrowed, who are now out of the country. One of the men, from a separate group, borrowed $500,000 from Dominion Bank in his corporate name, $500,000 in his personal name, $500,000 in his wife's name, $500,000 in his daughter's name, $500,000 in his son's name, and get this, $500,000 in the dog's name, all from Dominion Bank. The same man borrowed from Vector Bank, Dominion Bank, Bank of Boulder, Bank of the Rockies, and Women's Bank, and those loans were sold by those inside loan officers at the S&Ls to Omni Bank, which then serviced those loans for a 2-month period, and they purchased those loans for 80 cents on the dollar. Then they turned around and sold them off to First American out of Colorado Springs and out of Iowa and things of that nature for 90 cents on the dollar. And the reason that they moved them 3 times is because then federal officials, which are most of them are too lazy bank examiners to do the trail on this, and they couldn't determine. And the way that they did this is they took the collateral from this individual, but yet they never went down and registered with the recorder of deeds by putting of record a lien on the property. It was only done on paper and then moved. Once it was moved from one bank to the other, it became void, so therefore they couldn't come back on the original property that the guy put up. That's an example of S&L fraud. Now, these same men who have been involved in the HUD scandal, and I'm going to read from this. An MDC director, which is named Phil Wynn, was the instrumental source. He became FHA commissioner in 1981 under the Reagan administration. He was put in office for their favoritism in helping get George Bush and Ronald Reagan elected. Later, he became ambassador to Switzerland from 1988 to in 1989, which he was laundering lots of money at that time. Phil Wynn now runs Asset Investors, which is Colorado's largest financial institution. They sell mortgage-backed securities, and it's an MDC, a subsidiary company. While he was at HUD, there were several things that he was instrumental in doing. One, under the 1981 Economic Recovery Act tax law, he was able to instrument by putting in place tax credits for what was known as mod rehab. Section 8, 223F and 223D. The difference was the F programs were used units that could be fixed up, and the new ones were the 223Ds. Now, what they did is they went in there as insiders and were able to change the programs to benefit themselves. By putting these tax credits in, they could sell those tax credits once they got the project approved. Now, the normal way in which a person obtains a mod rehab unit is this. Each year, the Public Housing Authority in each district throughout the country, say Denver, Colorado, has 10,000 people needing assistance in paying their rent. They will go to the Public Housing Authority, do applications, so forth, and then they will submit those at the end of each year, those say 10,000 applicants, to HUD headquarters. And at the same time, Los Angeles might have 10,000, Kansas City might have 10,000, Washington might have 10,000. And at that time, say there's several million people across the nation from all these public housing authorities needing the assistance to help pay their rent. There's programs within HUD that have been in since 1969. And then the government will come back with so many appropriations for the year, number of units, and they will say, okay, we have only for the entire year, say, 100,000 units. Okay, during Reagan years, they chopped the budget in the HUD programs where they were only offering, say, 50,000 units per year. And so they had to divide up these units among all the cities. As an example, Denver should have, because of economic factors, they took several things into criteria. And they would take several things into criteria on this, and it would be, as an example, the economics, unemployment, so forth, and then make the determination who gets what in number of units. Okay, that is not the way the Phil Wynn, Larry Mizell, MDC, Ray Baker, Gold Crown Property Management, and Lance Wilson, J. Michael Queen, and the others at HUD did the programs. They did it this way. They had top-level people they put in place besides Phil Wynn in the programs at HUD. Now, this is a document out of 13 undersecretaries at HUD. These are the ones that they had who were involved, including one on a page you cannot see, that were involved at HUD. And they were giving these inside units to these men. The names of the individuals were Philip Wynn, Deborah Gordine, Ronnie Mahon, J. Michael Queen, and Lance Wilson, Phil Wynn, Philip Abrams, and Silvio D. Bartolomus were the undersecretaries. And during my investigation of these men, which was in 1969 regarding this, and I'll read from a government report in a moment, this is a letter from the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Housing. Lisa Phillips had, it's addressed to myself. This says, this confirmed the series of telephone calls you made during the staff, made to the staff of the Employment Housing Subcommittee this summer concerning our investigation of abuses and mismanagement within the U.S. Department of Housing. Thank you for the time you have expanded in conveying information about this critical investigation. Sincerely, Lisa Phillips. And that was, they had sent that thanking me for cooperating and giving them information. Philip Wynn and Philip Abrams had to appear before this congressional committee in June of 1989, and later it became what was known as the HUD scandal, which now, this month of November, there's been indictments against others, Deborah Gordine and so forth. Philip Wynn was indicted in this past February of 1993 regarding his role and agreed to $1 million fine on this subject, and he faces 4 to 5 years in prison. I suspect he will never serve any prison time whatsoever, and there's a reason for this. This is a government report that from that congressional committee talking about the Wynn Group, and after I display it here, I'm going to read it to you. Just one page, and it says, the Wynn Group was a team of HUD alumni who, as the name suggests, were big winners in the moderate rehabilitation program at a time when mod rehab funds were scarce, units much in demand. The Wynn Group received a significant share of these units. Their success in obtaining these units were not based on the unique merits of these particular projects, but rather resulted from the Wynn Group's connections at HUD. Now, the way that these men did this was they did not submit application like the people that were in need of assistance would submit. Then the Public Housing Authority, after they got their 25 units for Denver as an example, would put an ad in the paper that would say home builders, developers, owners, etc. If you have a HUD unit that you desire to put into the program, you know, please make application, etc. This was not how they did it. They went out to the Public Housing Authority, says, we have these units and we already have HUD approval for 160 units here, apartment complex, etc. Now, during my investigation, I found over 14,000 apartment units, and I only did one section, and that was out of Colorado here. There were over 14,000 total units out of this district, which was a 5-state area. At the same time, the Dallas Morning News came out in in December of 1991 with an investigation, finding these same men with separate entities that all ran back to MDC Holdings in Denver, and they did their own investigation and found out these men were slumlords. Then they tried to get the HUD secretary at the time, Jack Kemp, to do an investigation, and Mr. Kemp wouldn't do it. It's still to this day, this investigation has gone nowhere. These were the major developers. The ones circled are the men at MDC Holdings. Out of the top 13 developers in this country during the 80s, as you can see, I believe there's 7 of them that were the main developers. Okay, now, I want to go to several things. These were personal corporate notes, why I've got this particular HUD scandal, from the Wynn Group's own meetings regarding the various projects. And as an example, they were getting the projects sold on such a great scale. Kansas City, Lawrence, says new projects, Kansas City, Lawrence, Kansas, Philadelphia, and Pueblo status. It has been 4 weeks since we decided to find another project, etc. All expenses to be billed to RSF Ventures, which was RSF Ventures was going back to MDC Holdings. This was a confidential White House memo that Lance Wilson was personally involved with, which has never been displayed before. This particular memo is in regarding Food for Africa and how these men were donating a certain amount of money into the program, etc. I could go on all day about how they've ripped HUD off. It comes down to $50 billion budget authority the U.S. taxpayers are going to have to pay with 100,000 apartment units. And I might add, I forgot to mention the figure on the S&L scandal. We have been able to identify that we feel that it's nearly $1 trillion. Henry Gonzalez is saying the true S&L scandal is at $1.5 trillion, but yet the Congress does not want to recognize this. Now, these same men have been involved in the Denver airport, and that's a $12.3 billion scandal. This is a copy of an article that appeared in Spotlight newspaper out of Washington back in August of 1993, and it talks about the $12.3 billion problem, and it has many people in here where engineers and various people, myself quoted in there in my investigation of these men. Now, on the companies involved in the airport and the way this was created, there was a bribe paid to Mayor Pena. There was also a man by the name of Paul Swam. Paul Swam was the city council member back in 1982 that came up with the ingenious idea we need to possibly put a new Denver airport in. As of May the 23rd, 1990, he owned 8,955 shares of MDC stock. This is of record, and this was from the SEC filing, which I had obtained. The names of the companies that owned the Denver airport land in particular were MDC Holdings, Inc., Silverado Electric Finance, Bill Walters, which was a front for Larry Mizell and MDC, Michael B. Enterprises, MDC subsidiary company, Tower Limited Partnerships, which there were over 80 of them involved, which involved Gunther Russbacher, a well-known CIA operative, claims he was involved in one of those, and his name does appear on Tower 64 records. And I'll explain Gunther shortly about Silverado connection on money laundering. This was MDC subsidiary. Alice Wynn, which is Phil Wynn HUD scandal, MDC company. Airport Properties Ventures, Bill Walters. Hemlock Farkas Properties, Bill Walters. Upland Properties, MDC Silverado. Little Buckaroo Ranch, MDC Properties. King Ranch, Bill Walters. Gun Club Property, Bill Walters. Box Elder, MDC. Amcor, Lincoln Financial. GLA Partners, MDC. Greg Kent, MDC. Marathon Development Company, MDC. These were the names of the companies I've been able to identify, along with Dick Young, who was an anti-airport activist who went before a congressional hearing to cut the budget pertaining to the Denver airport. Now Dick Young is not licensed in the state of Colorado as a lawyer. He's a well-respected lawyer and was real estate attorney, and he was also a retired rear admiral from the Navy. He had to move out of the state because they hammered him in half with his business. This is an article that appeared in the Time magazine, and this was regarding the Denver airport, and it was also regarding the illegal political campaign contributions. I was very instrumental in bringing this article about, and it appeared on August the 13th, 1990 in Time magazine. Jonathan Beatty submitted when I was arrested, and I'll be getting into that, how the retaliation came against me for my exposing this man. Jonathan Beatty, in an article that appeared in the Houston Chronicle in September of '92, when I was arrested on false charges of making harassing phone calls and held for 10 months and 1 week. The article reads this: a man said to have been instrumental source in unraveling the savings and loan crisis was in Harris County Jail Monday on federal charge of making threatening interstate telephone calls. Stuart Webb, 38, allegedly made the calls to his former father-in-law, wealthy Denver businessman Leonard Millman. Webb contains the FBI unjustly acted because of pressure from Millman, but a spokesman for the agency in the Denver's office denied any government impropriety. Jonathan C. Beatty, a senior correspondent for Time magazine, wrote a letter in support of Webb. The news articles of Webb contributed to expose a pattern of illicit political influence in Denver and led to the indictments and subsequent convictions of several businessmen, said Beatty's letter placed in court records. Webb, who had lived in Houston for about a year before his recent arrest, is expected to be returned to Colorado. H. Michael Sokolow, a public defender, wrote in an emergency appeal to reduce Webb's $50,000 bond that Webb provided information to Congress pertaining to the late 1980s influence peddling scandal in the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Webb, a construction contractor by trade, also provided information to lawyers and investigators in the failure of Lincoln Savings, Silverado, etc. Mr. Webb, he wrote, as a political whistleblower on fraud on the highest levels of the institutions. Now, this was an article that appeared in the Houston Chronicle in September of 1992 when I was arrested, and I will be getting into that. But this was as a result of the hammer that I have been doing on these men and exposing their illegal activity. Now, on the illegal political campaign money laundering, this is a report that was done in completed in March of 1991 by Robert Gallagher. I worked with Robert, and I also worked with agents from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation in their 5,000 man-hour report that they had done on this. And basically, I'm going to read from a couple of pages. One is there were many the way that MDC had done this was this. First, they were extorting subcontractors, and it says right here in the report. As an example, a framer might be told to put on an invoice that he did additional work such as finish off a basement in a house. And when these investigators went out, they found that these basements had not been finished, that there were false invoices
invoices had been submitted. And the way that MDC was doing is they were telling them in the beginning, give me a check up there for $5,000 or $1,000 made out to Pena's campaign or George Bush's campaign or whoever they wanted to donate money to control that politician. And if the individual didn't do it, then they were intentionally firing these subcontractors. Then after they started having such massive turnover, they began actually saying, we will reimburse you. This is what they found throughout this Gallagher report, which is 5,000 man-hours. Many of the people on here, one of them was Frederico Pena, Don Bain, Robert Brooks, Hank Brown, Colorado Republicans, Democratic National Victory Fund. Several people appeared, including Mike Norton, the United States Attorney, took illegal campaign contributions from these men. And in this report, it says, criminal offenses and recommendations on page 8. It's a probable cause to exist to believe that MDC committed numerous criminal violations relating to election laws. Probable cause also exists to believe that 2 of MDC's subcontractors were extorted during the solicitation process. Although probable cause exists to believe to charge a variety of offenses, the statute of limitations precludes the filing of any criminal charges. The statute of limitation periods for election offenses, which are misdemeanors, is 18 months, while the statute of limitations period for extortion, which is a felony, is 3 years. All the identified offenses are beyond the statute of limitations. A number of possible federal offenses were also identified. Although the state lacks jurisdiction to prosecute these offenses, information gathered during this investigation has been provided the United States Attorney's Office since 1980. On page 111 of this report, it says, first, the Internal Revenue Service should continue its examination of MDC's tax returns to determine if any federal tax violations were committed. Second, the Colorado State Attorney General should, in conjunction with the ongoing IRS investigation, pursue any state tax law violations committed by MDC. Although some contributions were not reimbursed in such a way as to leave a paper trail, many contributions were. Third, the Colorado Attorney General or appropriate agency should conduct an investigation into the land acquisitions and land evaluations at the site of the new airport. Anyway, it goes on to say that right in here, Brian Richards, one of the subcontractors, related that when Larry Mizell and David Mandrich, Larry Mizell being the Chief Executive Officer of MDC Holdings at 3600 South Yosemite, and David Mandrich being the President of Richmond Homes and Wood Brothers and many other subsidiaries in Colorado and throughout the western United States. It says that Brian Richards related that when Mizell and Mandrich were in Arizona, he witnessed Mizell and Mandrich discussing contributions and heard Mizell tell Mandrich that Mandrich needed to take an envelope to a Dukakis fundraiser, etc. It goes on to talk about coercion, threats used in the solicitation process, and so forth, where subcontractors were extorted. I could go on all day about this in regards to this. These men, I feel, were running, and I suspect it was nearly $200 million in illegal political campaign contributions. Now, further regarding the illegal political campaign contributions, if anybody wants any information about any of this, they can contact me at 303-634-4233. That's a voicemail number. It has all the information pertaining to audio tapes and this videotape, as well as a new book called Defrauding America by Rodney Stitch, which outlines all the details of all these major scandals and how these men have been involved with the CIA and so forth in these activities. And so this book is $27.50, and it's got the information on it as well. Now, I was discussing illegal political campaign money laundering. I personally pulled the election records on Leonard Millman, Larry Mizell, and Philip Wynn in Albert Rose. 4 men who are involved with these men, or involved in this group with George Bush. And these personal contribution lists was phenomenal that it came up. They covered almost 80 congressmen and senators just from those 4 men. Now, I started into looking into Norman Brownstein and other people that were MDC directors and who were involved with these men. And when I found Norman Brownstein, he had covered everybody blanket across the United States. All opponents, Democrat and Republican, whether they won or not, he made sure he greased everybody for future favoritism. There was an FEC record that was requested in federal court in Denver, Colorado regarding these illegal political money laundering, and the case was numbered 91N-1816, filed on 11/26 of 1991. Still to this day, the Federal Election Commission has done nothing. The United States government has done nothing to bring these men to justice. As an example, this is an article that I'll just quote from about these men and their illegal political campaign money laundering. This appeared in one of the local papers. Said that in February 1990. It says the biggest controversy of the campaign so far, and this was pertaining to Hank Brown and his $1.5 million treasury that he had for his election. It says campaign so far has involved fundraising. All three Democrats have criticized Brown for choosing Denver developer Larry Mizell as his chairman for the December the 8th fundraising luncheon that featured President Bush. Mizell's MDC Holdings was involved in several risky land deals, Silverado Savings Loan, Denver Thrift Institution, etc. I'll move on to some other subjects now that I've also found these men to be involved with. As an example, I started into the illegal drug gun connection of Silverado Savings, and what I had found there was I had been investigating these men since February of 1986 because of my daughter initially, and that involved a parental termination out of Texas where they bought a state judge off. My former wife tried to kill my daughter when she was 26 days old, and her father bought her completely out of it, and they say now that I can't see my child, which is unconstitutional. My daughter's nearly 9 years of age, and I had originally come after these men for this purpose, to expose her father because of what I was hearing during the latter part of the marriage and starting to pick up some pieces from her brother and so forth, talking about him being a mobster. But by about 1989, 1990, when I saw the damage they were doing to this country, I said, these men all have to go to jail, just not one, but the whole group of them, because of what they were involved with. And I started finding in 1991 a Gunther Rustbacher, former CIA operative, who claimed, the major news media discredit him, claimed to be an October surprise pilot flying an SR-71 and George Bush back from a meeting in October of 1980 where two books have been written about this, where the Iranians were paid to keep the hostages for an additional 444 days or whatever additional days it was between November and January of election. And if you recall, the day that Ronald Reagan took office, within 5 minutes thereafter, as being announced that the hostages were being released. There was $40 million apparently by Michael Riconosciuto, who was involved with Ian's Law Software. Michael Riconosciuto worked for my former father-in-law, Leonard Millman. Michael Riconosciuto laundered $40 million through Valley National Bank in Phoenix, Arizona. Michael Riconosciuto was a partner with Gunther Rustbacher. Gunther Rustbacher claims that he laundered the money to Silverado Savings Loan from F-16 fighter jets and from Apache helicopters and other fixed-wing aircraft, including money or weapons that were shipped, I might add, to Iraq, Iran, Libya, and Israel without U.S. government approval, and who had George Bush's cousin and his brother and Adam Khashoggi, the famous world arms dealer, involved as well. And that the proceeds were being laundered to Silverado Savings, National Acceptance, and MDC Holdings in Denver. And this is when I first found out that MDC and its crowd are known as an agency asset company, a CIA asset company, where they aren't directly paid by the Central Intelligence itself, but they are used by a faction of CIA. And there's two factions. There's a Faction 1 and a Faction 2. Faction 1 being the George Bush crowd, who have been involved in this guns and drug stuff since 1959. Currently being run by Ted Shackley out of Colombia, who's been on the CIA payroll for years, and also the money from the sale of the drugs being laundered through the MDC Holdings and so forth. But they are known as an agency asset. Now, I'm going to show a few documents here regarding things of F-16 fighter jets, and I'm going to read from this. This is just one case filing, an addendum by Robert Medley out of the United States Court of the Northern District of Western District of North Carolina, and this was filed in, I'll show the date here after you get the exhibit. And the date on this was in 1990. And what it was is a motion 2255, which is similar to habeas corpus type thing, to ask him to be turned loose from jail. Obviously, this was a political prisoner. Now, there was another filing also in the Southern District of of Illinois for the Western District by John Cole. John Cole is one person I was in jail with. I was being held as a political prisoner for 10 months and 1 week and shipped to Springfield, Missouri for evaluations, and which they found me to be totally competent and of sound mind and said that, you know, that I shouldn't even be here. They said the charges, matter of fact, shouldn't have ever been levied against me. But this case filing was 92 CV 707 WDS, filed on October 21st, 1992. Since this was filed by John Cole, the judge in St. Louis has destroyed all the evidence and all documents on this particular case. On this one, it involves the same thing, the shipment of F-16 fighter jets. This man talking about is a little more clear in detail versus what John Cole has produced. Cole was personally marking railroad cars scrap that had F-16 fighter jets, Apache helicopters, M1 tanks, other fixed aircraft that were being shipped to Zapata Oil Company warehouses, a division of Zapata owned by George Bush and J. Hugh Litke, and also a division of Pennzoil. It was being shipped to their warehouse in the port of Houston and into the port of New Orleans by rail to Houston and by barge to New Orleans. Now, the players in here, and it says right here, Gunther Rustbacher on the bottom of the document, also known as Emory J. Peden, and also known as Captain Bob Walker of Office of Naval Intelligence. And he is the one that helped create some of the disaster with the Denver airport in pushing things and laundering the money. But what it basically goes on to in here to say, without reading the whole document because of the time that we have, it says right here that there was a company called Parks Corporation involved, a Crown family involved in General Dynamics, etc., and that they were trading these high-tech weapons with Perimeter for oil, and it would go to Parameter Partners Oil Transmission Company, and that H.G. Walker, George Bush's cousin, was involved in the shipment of these weapons, and that this was owned by Granite City Steel, that these weapons were being shipped to make it look like they were melting the weapons down. And the Granite City is owned by National Steel Company. National Steel Company is the mafia Japanese family out of Japan that George Bush's brother Prescott worked for. Anyway, these weapons were being shipped to South America. Adam Khashoggi was selling the weapons, and Gunther Rustbacher was making sure the weapons were delivered to his railroad company doing it. Gunther says he laundered the money through MDC Holdings. What it came down to is MDC were the money launderers. Now, while I'm on guns and drugs, I have an article here. This is a person at Darlene Novinger. Now, this frightens the FBI when her name's mentioned any place, because Darlene, this is an article on her recently. Darlene has been an instrumental source of mine regarding George Bush and the connection of George Bush and guns and drugs. And Darlene had been working on an investigation to where she was looking for the FBI into the possible activity of then Vice President George Bush and his son Jeb Bush out of Florida involving guns and drugs. And they killed her husband, her first husband. They killed her father this past July because of her doing a talk show appearance on our Tom Valentine, Radio Free America. There has been many people die, but Darlene is one person who is in our network as an example of guns and drugs. This is another one, a DEA pilot, Basil Abbott, who is incarcerated in Springfield as a political prisoner. Bo served his 18 months for his part in bringing cocaine into Memphis, Tennessee, part of what they call BIM, being Memphis on Monday operation, which involves major airlines, FedEx, Continental, United, and Delta, where they go in and pick up drugs and deliver it to other places in the United States. Bo Abbott, I could read this affidavit, but it would take tremendous amounts of time to do it. But basically, he was working for Santa Burial, DEA station chief in Central America from 1974 until 1983, when Santa Burial was arrested by the good guys at DEA for being in charge of drug smuggling by the entire air wing of DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, into the United States. And Bo Abbott had been flying, he was one of many pilots who had been flying drugs to the United States and weapons to the Mesquite Indians in resupplying the Contras. He was also very instrumental in carrying Inslaw software down to General Noriega, which had information from the White House on the money laundering through Panama that they were doing and the proceeds from the sale of guns and drugs. Bo asked to testify in Noriega's trial, and as a result, Bo was arrested, and now he's in Springfield, Missouri, incarcerated. So I could go on with drugs and guns forever, but I'm going to display a couple of current documents that I got. This is a DEA document. Now, the Drug Enforcement Administration, after showing this document, will probably be coming after me and trying to apply some kind of false drug charges. I don't use drugs. I don't distribute drugs. I've never done drugs. But this particular document talks about the entire air wing and what kind of aircraft they have, including such aircraft that they have that take for short landing strips. I have inside sources still in Addison, Texas today that say that the DEA brings the guns or drugs into there. They're also bringing them into Houston International Airport, and that these go into white vans, and these vans are not going to police departments, but are going to the drug dealers' houses in both cities of Dallas, Texas, and Houston, Texas. And I have a source in each city, and this confirms exactly what Bo Abbott had been describing and what was going on with the DEA air wing, exactly to the T. Now, this is another document that I have. This is an article, as an example, that appeared in your rag magazine here, Westward. This was done by Brian Gaffney, who is a very good reporter, who is now waiting tables in Aspen, Colorado, because he cannot get a job in the news media because he wrote this about Neil Bush. This was another whistleblower reporter who was hammered. Now, Brian Gaffney obtained a copy of this document. They would not give it to him. He was allowed to read it to write the article. This came from a CIA source of mine. This is Sunflow Energy Company, which is Neil Bush. Basically, what it comes down to is the individuals that were involved in Sunflow were CIA, Central Intelligence operatives, involved in the entire operation. I could go through and show you here the names of the parties that are involved. One of them is Dr. David Parrish, also known as Central Intelligence, been involved. He was also involved, ironically, in money laundering with M&L Business Machines Company. Now, I could go on all day. I've got a copy here of what's called the Christic Institute filing, which was out of Washington, D.C., and it was in regards to guns and drugs, talking about then Vice President George Bush and so forth, and how the proceeds were being laundered. Some people think it was laundered through BCCI. It wasn't. Part of it was. A majority was laundered through Colorado. Colorado has no money laundering statutes on the book in the state level itself. And when you have federal protection, which these men had in particular, especially regarding the payoffs and bribes by certain government officials. I'm going to get into that as an example. I was incarcerated with 3 different men. I had been doing an investigation of the money laundering prior to being incarcerated, and this was from September of 1992 to July of 1993. Just a few months ago, they turned me loose and dropped the charges because they refused to take me to trial because they had no evidence against me. And what they claimed that I made a threatening, harassing phone call, there was a phone call made as a result of me being shot at in July of 1991. And I stayed away from the FBI for quite a period of time. But during this time that the FBI was hunting me, I was still investigating, which I'm still doing today. And I came across M&L Business Machines Company. While I was incarcerated, I went ahead and filed with the federal judge Nottingham, and this was dated February 1993, to appear before a United States federal grand jury regarding M&L Business Machines Company. Now, this letter that I sent to the judge stated my rights under federal law and under Title 18 U.S.C. for stating that reporting of crimes to the federal government. Now, the evidence that I've been able to acquire on M&L Business Machines from numerous sources, including 3 people I was incarcerated with, which I confirmed from and during my incarceration period. These were the names of, and I apologize if they're not typed, but these are the names of the front companies used by Charles Keating, Leonard Millman, Larry Mizell, Philip Wynn, and many other people, including the Iran-Contra connection and the guns and drugs through M&L. MDC would create companies or use other companies to move money overseas. And as an example, the bribes of certain government officials, one of them being Michael Norton, one being Michael Norton, the United States Attorney in Denver, Colorado from 1987 through 1993. David Mann, his boss in Washington, D.C., head of FBI Bob Pence in Denver, Colorado, now retired in 1992. The attorney for the Silverado case, Zimmerman, Charles Keating, Leonard Millman, Vince Burrell, the Denver Nuggets, so on and so forth, and a judge on the Blinder Robinson case, Judge Sparn of Nevada, who was specially appointed on that case, all took bribes and payoffs from these men to cover things up, and they laundered their bribes through M&L Business Machines. Now, I got direct information from sources at M&L because of being incarcerated with them, and also the evidence that I found regarding other things. And these are the exhibits on the particular box numbers and so forth that are there. Now, M&L, one of the ironic things is, and I'm going to go over it real rapidly with you, is that why would, and this is a question for yourselves, why would, if M&L was a check-kiting scandal, which the United States Attorney has tried to make it look like, why would, when Patrick Gibbons, M&L officer, was arrested and his property seized from the FBI, why is it that he had the following items in his home, but yet he's never been charged? 27 weapons, 22 no serial numbers, 7 fully automatic silencers, 200 pounds of marijuana, 20 kilos of cocaine, 147 vials of human growth steroids, 160 vials of animal growth steroids, 200 vials of antibiotic steroids, 7 gym bags each containing 1 sawed-off shotgun with ski mask, crowbar, literature on trusts to hide income tax, information on money laundering to the Isle of Jersey, addresses and phone numbers of barristers, English attorneys for blind trusts, several shelf trusts for sale, Swiss and Cayman bank accounts for sale, citizenship certificates for sale, Brazil, Mexico, or Puerto Rico passports for sale. All you need to do is attach your picture ID. 7 passports, each with showing different names that Mr. Gibbons used to go to the Isle of Jersey and the Isle of Man, as well as the Cayman Isles. And this is a kicker. Letters from FDIC bank examiners with lists of banks that would fail in the next 6 months. Now, why did the FBI, why did they not arrest this man for these charges, and why didn't the federal officials bring charges against him? It's because these same federal officials were the ones that laundered their bribes through M&L. Also, Mayor Pena accepted a $2.5 million payoff that came from an M&L account given to Philip Wynn in Mayor Pena's office, witnessed by 2 M&L officers and 2 other individuals, and that pay was $2.5 million for Mayor Pena's vote on the Denver airport. Mayor Pena now is current Secretary of Transportation under the Clinton administration. I'd also like to go a little farther with you in money laundering. They say they can't find the Keating money. 50 million of it's in M&L Business Machines Company. Also, M&L laundered the money for a man by the name of King, a killer here in Denver, Colorado, that was tied to United Bank. The feds have covered that up. Robert Joseph personally told me $197,000 was laundered through there, and he knows it was the money stolen from United Bank. But yet federal officials are currently offering a $100,000 reward for the particular subject. I could go on all day about the various scandals that these men in particular have been involved with. And I want to show quite briefly and rapidly, because of the amount of time that we have, this is a document that I went to the FBI in 1986 reporting crimes of Leonard Millman and his various things that he was involved with that I was finding. This is, it may be difficult to read, but this is an example copy of Michael Norton filing with the Internal Revenue Service, MDC Holdings, etc. I filed numerous things against him. This is picture of my car after my tires had been shot at. These men in July of 1991, when they shot my tires out, they have done everything that they can to intentionally destroy my life and lives of other people that are in my network, which is retaliation against federal informants. We're dealing with some mafia dons here, and basically I need your help in shutting them down at the current time. The way that we are going to do this is the same way Charles Keating was brought to jail and put in jail, brought to light as far as his activity. These men have escaped everything because of their ties to the Bush administration and now to the Clinton administration. They have 5 positions within the Clinton administration. Now, I have audio tapes for sale that I'm offering for $49.95 for 5 tapes. The first one being on the S&L scandal and junk bond scandal. And anybody desires these tapes, they can contact me at the 303-634-4233 number. And they can also write at P.O. Box 681, Dickinson, Texas 77539. Call the 303 number, 634-4233. It has all the information about Rodney's book, my audio tape, videotape, and so forth. Now, the second tape on the HUD scandal, the third on the MDC illegal politicals, the airport scandal, Silverado, and guns and drugs, and so forth. Now, I'm asking the American people to help us out. Linda Thomas, who was involved in the Waco video and helped expose what really occurred, she has agreed to take this case on at no cost. 2 other attorneys out of Philadelphia have agreed to take this case at no cost. They need $3 million to depose George Bush, Leonard Millman, Albert Rose, George Ryder, Larry Mizell, Leonard Millman, Philip Wynn, and the others who have been involved, and to bring these men to justice under RICO, the Racketeering Influence and Corruption Organizational Law, and under the Continuous Criminal Enterprise Law for treason, for money laundering, and drug importation into the United States, because Congress and the Senate will not do it. Part of the reason is because of blackmail material George Bush has had, what I refer to as the brownstone, the blackmail material starting back in 1975. And that's referred in what's called the Katoa Affidavit by a Colonel Katoa regarding them bugging U.S. congressmen and senators' offices and so forth back in 1975. I'm asking you to please help. If you can give a donation or buy a tape, the money will go for the cause of further exposing. Thank you very much.